The Oceanus Wake, the Waterlands. The Swiss Seekers, the Leviathans, and the Thessalar dragons come from here. The Alara Peaks, the Moonlands, a land of beautiful grace. Many of the humans and dragons here, especially the Ghost Eye, Mistseeker, and Silverwings, a land where the moon and stars are everything. The Kalehold, the Royal Lands. Also home to Port Caelus, the Kalehold is where dragons such as Crimson Horns, Golden Deaths, and Molten Queens come from. The Kalehold is located at the heart of the continent. Only the most powerful families come from here, and anyone born with gifts goes there to study. The Crest's Reach, the Mountain Lands. Only one type of dragon species has ever been found to survive on the rocky peaks. The Fog Breath, a small, quick dragon type. Not many humans can survive the thin air, so any cities in the Crest Reach would be at the foot of the mountain ranges. Chapter 1. Seasmoke was thrown forward as the huge dragon touched down onto the smooth tile ground. "We're here," his father, Marinius Aegir, grunted, pulling sharply on the dragon's reins. Seasmoke glanced to his left at the huge building. It had to be big. Dragons came and went there each day. "Go on," Marinus muttered again. He hadn't even turned around once since they landed. No surprise, Seasmoke thought, grinning annoyed. Most of the others had already left their dragons. Seasmoke glared at Marinus's back before sliding off down the dragon. Without another word, the red dragon took off, vanishing into the gathering clouds. "Stupid sea serpent," he muttered, glancing up at the sky. The clouds seemed darker, heavier. Rain. Strong rain as well, Seasmoke thought, nodding slightly. It wouldn't be a problem. It wouldn't rain here, but it would at the Oceanus Wake. It always rained there. A loud shriek turned throughout the grounds, turning Seasmoke's attention from the sky to the tall spire. A beautiful white and gold dragon had her tails curled around the pointy tower, her golden claws gripping the swirled ridges. The dragon slowly moved its head downwards as if it was inspecting each one of the newly arrived. Eventually the dragon's claws gripped harder into the pillar, and it leapt into the air, gliding down gracefully to come to a stop outside the huge silver gates. A rider dismounted, her hand still holding the dragon's leg. The white dragon, now closer to Seasmoke, had beautiful golden veins tracing up her wings and legs, and the golden crest around her chest gave it away that the dragon was probably a molten queen, probably from the Kalehold. Seasmoke's family often traded in the Kalehold, especially at Port Caelus, since it was one of the best trading ports for anyone from the Oceanus Wake. Hello to everyone from the different lands, as I'm certain many of you come from the edges of our continent, and we all thank you. I'm Grandmaster Vandoria, owner and bonder to Ratika, the Molten Queen, Vandoria explained, looking around at the gathered teens. I'll be working through this cloud slowly, bonding you to the White Dragon one by one, starting with the furthest lands and working towards those of you from the Kalehold, she added, gesturing to the gathered teens. Starting with the Oceanus Wake, the furthest land, and we only have a few students from there, so I'll start with Seasmoke Aegir and Ruth Corrales, and so on, Vandoria said, waving her hand to Seasmoke and then Ruth. Since I believe you both come from well-known families and are our only Oceanus Wake candidates, she added, sighing slightly. Seasmoke nodded and walked forward, glancing barely at one of the Kalehold candidates. He barely noticed Seasmoke, but when he did, he pulled out a sharp bronze dagger. Seasmoke scoffed and turned around, his coat almost making him fall over. "And you are," he asked, bowing to the shorter, at least 15-year-old. Thorne Silveris, Kaleholder," the one holding the dagger hissed, pointing the sharp blade at Seasmoke's chest. "Well, Thorne of the Kalehold, or perhaps Port Caelus, where are you from? Drawing weapons at fellow candidates is not exactly a good reputation to start with, if you want to bond with the dragon, that is," Seasmoke explained, bowing again and walking forward towards Grandmaster Vandoria. He glanced back again at Thorne, who had dropped his dagger and fumbled to pick it up angrily. Seasmoke was led inside a candlelit room, which smelled of lavender. Vandoria sat at one side of the desk, pulling out scrolls and placing them on the table in front of Seasmoke. Dragon pins lay nearby, as did bracelets, gems, and scales. "Seasmoke Aegir, correct?" Vandoria asked, looking directly at Seasmoke. He nodded and glanced down at the scrolls. "I believe I rode with your father, Marinus Aegir's wing," Vandoria added with an annoyed face. "It was no wonder we lost so many riders. Only if he cared about his dragon himself, wanting gold and to get rich fast," Vandoria said with a disgusted expression. "You don't seem like him," she added. The scrolls had hand-drawn sketches of dragons, different species and size charts compared to humans. I'll be asking you a few questions to get to know you better, and then see what you know about these dragons, Vandoria explained, gesturing to the scrolls and pins on the wall. Seasmoke nodded again. And on another note, I saw how Thorne and Silveris acted out there, she added, giving Seasmoke a weird look he couldn't quite pin onto one emotion. Believe me, we've dealt with stuck-up kale holders, Vandoria muttered, glancing out the window before sighing again and opening a notebook. So, first question, and try not to think very hard about these, she said, skimming the page before speaking again. If you wanted any dragon type, no matter which one you were bonded to, which one would it be? Vandoria asked. Seasmoke blinked, skimming the different types in his head. He answered quickly. A leviathan, he muttered. Even though Seasmoke knew the leviathans were a strange type of dragon, much like the Thassalers, they were unbondable. They never listened and betrayed their rider, and grew to enormous sizes, though nothing compared to the Golden Death, of course. If any one of my town bonded with the leviathan, we wouldn't be under the trading terms of the Kale Hold, Seasmoke added bitterly. You're from the Oceanus Wake, so I guess it makes sense, Vandoria mumbled. Next question. Say a rogue rider, of which there are a few to this continent, was to attack a town. What would your first instinct be? She asked slightly, lowering her book. Fight them, curse them, Seasmoke hissed, immediately lifting his head. Vandoria nodded and scribbled something down. Ground or sea? She asked. Seasmoke froze for a moment. On one hand, he had been taught to sail, sea. On the other, he had sword fighting lessons on the ground. Ground, Seasmoke said, slightly unsure. I noticed you hesitated, Vandoria observed before sighing again. Marinius's influence, I suppose, she muttered, before writing down the answer and looking up again. You know how to fight? Vandoria asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, Seasmoke answered defiantly. Vandoria nodded. And in case of the war within two cities, your first instinct would be? If I had a dragon, I would eliminate the bigger, closer threats first, letting the rest of the army deal with the main goal, Seasmoke explained before nodding to himself. It seemed like the most logical reason. Never grafted the mastermind behind it all. Vandoria nodded again. Not the answer I was expecting. Many students try to eliminate everything in their path once they have a dragon. Most of those students become rogue riders, she muttered, sounding annoyed. What would you do if you ever found yourself over an empty patch of sea, abyss-like and storm-struck? Vandoria asked. This question is directed especially towards our Oceanus Wake students, despite not having many, she added. Seasmoke blinked quickly. He'd heard stories of this. The Abyssul Delrahs, a leviathan-filled part of the sea. Storms often caught unwary riders and sailors by surprise. I'd fly carefully above the clouds, avoiding the lightning and heavy rain, Seasmoke answered, shaking slightly. So many riders and dragons had gone missing in the Abyssul Delrahs. Vandoria nodded again. It's good to see some students know the lands well, she sighed before putting down the notebook. Is there a species of dragon you didn't want at all? She asked. Crimson Horn. I don't want the same dragon as my father, Seasmoke answered sappily. No surprise there, your father dragon was the only thing he ever cared about more than gold, Vandoria explained before gesturing to the scrolls. Well, with the answers you have given me, there are a few dragons we can remove, she muttered. The Silverwing, a small, thin, elusive dragon. Stop to think, just too long. A sweet dragon, but I doubt you two would ever get along, Vandoria explained, rolling up the Silverwing scroll and moving it to a rack behind her desk. The Ghost Eye, a slow, huge dragon. It can't fly to thin air and despises water. It can, however, teleport. But given you are from the Oceanus Wake, I highly doubt you want a dragon who hates what makes your land, well, itself, Vandoria muttered. I know there are a few students from Alara Peaks who would match very well with the Ghost Eye, she added. The Abyss Seekers, a watery type of dragon, common around the Oceanus Wake. I'm sure you're quite familiar with this breed of dragon. Seasmoke nodded. He'd seen the small sea-coloured dragons flying about. They didn't have any special fire or blast attacks, just claws and teeth. Vandoria nodded slowly. Well, that leaves us with the Mistseeker, the Golden Death, the Molten Queen, and the Fog Breath. 4 dragons, she explained, showing the scrolls. Starting with the Molten Queen, the second biggest dragon, commonly found in shades of gold and white. They are elegant dragons and do like a lot of attention. Best given to stuck-up riders like that Thorne Silveris. They are, after all, best paired with kale holders. Molten Queens are identified by their long curling tails and gold-stained claws. Horn shapes vary from very curly to tall and elegant. The tail is spike-3 and runs along with small feathers. Now, while I do think you'd be able to bond with the Molten Queen, I think you'd have a hard time trying to give her the attention she needs. There are much better matches for you, Vandoria explained, shutting the Molten Queen scroll quite quickly. Seasmoke winced slightly. From what he could tell, there was a dragon he was leaning towards, but Seasmoke knew not to hope for anything. Now, while I believe you would be able to handle a frog breath, being someone who was raised around the sea, I highly doubt you'd be able to keep up with the thin air they are used to. Same for the Mist Seeker, she explained, removing both the scrolls, pushing the final one forward. The Golden Death is the largest dragon breed, often a mix of black and gold. However, the Golden Death we have here is mainly black, with golden veins on her wings. Now, as you can see from the sketch, these dragons grow the most, ending up ginormous compared to their rider, but they are deeply loyal and will stay with their rider until one of them dies. Some Golden Queens have been known to slow down their rider's life so they'll live for longer. They have 3 sets of horns, 1 curved and 2 sharp. Sharp webbed spikes running along their tail. The tail ends in 4 sharp spines. The Golden Deaths like to fight first, following their first instinct. I believe our Golden Death would be the perfect match for you, Vandoria explained softly. Seasmoke stared down at the dragon on the scroll, a huge dragon, one that would shame his father's crimson horn. Vandoria smiled and stood up. Perhaps we should go and meet Valkiro, she said. Seasmoke stood up and followed Vandoria out of the room. He looked around at the huge black dragon. Valkiro growled softly, bending down to an eye level, just to be at a level with Seasmoke. Her eyes were a beautiful gold, as were the webbing between her spines and the spikes on her underscales. Vandoria had gone to find some of Valkyro's old scales to fashion both a ring and a medallion. Seasmoke walked forward and placed her hand on Valkyro's head. She nuzzled against his hand softly. She's only around her juvenile stage, Vandoria explained, coming up next to Seasmoke. She'll grow much bigger than this, around 40 times this size in 30 years, she added. Seasmoke looked carefully at Valkiro. She would grow huge. Vandoria handed Seasmoke a ring with a scale embedded into it and a black scale medallion on a golden chain. It'll remind the other dragons that Valkiro has a rider and that you belong to a dragon, Vandoria explained. You'll get your first mission tomorrow, along with your wings and the wing captain. So practice flying, she added, before walking off to go question more students. Seasmoke grinned and slipped on the ring and the medallion. Valkiro growled again and bent down. She was already fitted with the saddle. Seasmoke grabbed the flight strap and pulled himself up into the saddle, grabbing the black reins. Valkiro shook out her wings and bent down before launching into the air and flying high above the spire. Seasmoke glowed at the distance, looking at the heavy pouring rain. It would come here soon, but for now, the Oceanus wake was doused in yet another storm.